Before I call the Honourable Member for Indi, I would remind the House that this is the Honourable Member's maiden speech, and I would ask the House to extend to her the same courtesies as we have just extended to the Member for Hotham. I call the Honourable Member for Indi.
Madam Speaker, parliamentary colleagues, special friends, family and David. Madam Speaker, warm congratulations to you on your election, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you and my colleagues in this place for their warm welcome. I proudly begin my first speech by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of this land, both past and present. Today, I'm going to share a story about myself, my electorate of Indi, and the power of community to reinvent itself. And I will introduce you to the Voice for Indi, the rural community movement and philosophy that has brought me to this place. I'm honoured to be the representative of the people of Indi, and I'm grateful to my family and some of the 700 plus supporters and volunteers, almost 1,000 donors, and of course the voters who have brought me to this House. Many of you have made an extraordinary effort to be here today, and I can only imagine what you must have done. Getting up early, families organised, children, animals, lunches done, kids on buses, farms cared for, packing picnics, organising carpooling, and doing that terrific trip 8 hours up the Hume Highway on buses. So to the volunteers, to all of you, those of you who staffed the booths, ran the offices at Alexandra, Wangaratta, Wodonga and Benalla, the door knockers, those who made the coffees, the cup of teas, arranged the food, the people who ran the classes and shared their skills, the scrutineers, the organisers of local meetings, to the young people, to the lawyers, the designers, the marketers, the diary keepers, the bookkeepers, the reporters, the journalists, and most important, to the makers of all things orange, all of you, for your courage, your belief and your conviction that we could do it. Thank you. In the 1880s, some 5 generations ago, my family left Europe in harsh times to make a better life for themselves and their children's children's children. Their courage and persistence is my foundation, like it is for so many Australians and so many of the people who are gathered here. On my father's side, Elizabeth Ann Brown arrived from County Cork Island in 1860. She was 20 and alone. She died at the grand age of 87 and is buried in the Tallangatta Cemetery. Her occupation, proudly, farmer. Arriving in the Chiltern goldfields of northeast Victoria, she quickly met and married a wise bloke, John Tyrrell, a miner from Cornwall in England. In 1875, they selected land in the Mitter Valley, just below the township of Tallangatta. And barely a year later, John Tyrrell was killed in a mining accident at El Dorado, leaving Elizabeth Ann to raise 6 children and 2 nephews. And my family, Madam Speaker, is rich with the stories of clearing the land, dealing with floods, fires, drought, and the desperate struggle to meet the conditions to purchase that land. And in 1890, Elizabeth Ann, 30 years after her arrival in Australia, made the final payment on the land and in her own right won free title. And her 4th child, Albert, was my great-grandfather. And her legacy to me, courage, persistence, dogged determination, and deep roots into farming and the rural community of northeast Victoria. And she was a woman in agriculture, well before that term was even thought of. And on the other side of my family, my great-great-grandfather worked in the post office at Wodonga. His job was to travel overnight on the train, sorting the mail so it would arrive in Melbourne ready to be delivered by 10 a.m. And my grandmother, Rose Roberta Chapman, was born in Wodonga in November 1888. She married Gladstone Robert McGowan, son of Tasmanian pub owners, in 1920, and she went on to become a teacher, mother of 6 children, and a grand matriarch. She's buried in the Yackandandah Cemetery, next to my father, my mother, 2 sisters, and a dearly loved brother, and where I too plan to be buried. And Granny's legacy to me: be a teacher, be a lover of stories and history, have a deep sense of social justice, community service, and never forget to laugh. So it's not known whether these 2 families knew each other, but what is known is that it was a dangerous time to live in rural Australia. And in Granny's words, we lived in Wodonga, and during that time the Kelly bushrangers were active. And my father, who worked for the PNG before it became Australia Post, used to be accompanied by an armed policeman on the train because they feared it might be ambushed. And to my parents, Paul McGowan met and married Mari Tyrrell when he was a young agricultural scientist working at the Rutherglen Research Station. They lived, farmed and ran a business in the Indigo Valley, 20 kilometres south of Wodonga, all their lives. And I'm proud to say that I live in that valley on my own small farm, and where I have conducted a rural consultancy business. Well, I did, up till September the 7th. Well, in the early days of my business, the jobs were many and varied. I lobbied for the establishment of a school for the flying fruit fly circus. I lobbied for home and community care in Wodonga, Tallangatta, Corryong, Beechworth, Chiltern, Rutherglen, Yackandandah. I lobbied for palliative care in the Ovens, King and Keewar valleys, mobile childcare for farming and rural families. And through this work, I built extensive networks, gained first-hand knowledge of the challenges of delivering services in rural areas, particularly in our valleys and towns, and I learnt that one size does not fit all. And most importantly, it's a constant struggle to have our rural voices heard. A highlight of these years was working with the Victorian Government Department of Agriculture as a Rural Affairs Advisor, and also travelling to Canada on a Churchill Fellowship to study Rural Women's Network and their role in improving communications with government. When I was 40, my mother died. She was dearly loved and a really important part of my life. It was a turning point for me, and a second turning point as being elected to Parliament. But first, I recall thinking when Mum died, soon my life too will be over, and what will I have to show for it? So I returned to study. I completed my master's degree in applied science at the University of Western Sydney at Hawkesbury, and I learned how to work with communities for change. The Australian Rural Leadership Program helped me grow in the arts of leadership, understanding the role of shared vision and the power of networks in transforming rural communities. I decided to take a more active role in agricultural politics. I was an inaugural member of Australian Women in Ag, and I rose through the ranks to become national president. I participated in National Farmer Federation meetings and was elected to the Victorian Farmers Federation policy body. I learnt many skills, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, working with difference, building partnerships, how to chair meetings, how to build teams, how to embrace diversity. I became involved in international agricultural politics, trade, and became committed to Australia's role in feeding the world. I restructured my business and I became a consultant to rural communities with a specialist skill in development, empowerment and transformation. Working in Australia and more recently in Ireland, India and Papua New Guinea, my clients were national rural research and development corporations, state and local governments and non-government organisations. Teaching leadership became a passion. Together with friends and colleagues, many of whom are here today, we taught community leadership skills, and we set up the Alpine Valleys Community Leadership Program. We ran leadership conferences, we talked about vision, we built networks, we wrote submissions, we grew our businesses, we grew in skill, wisdom and confidence, and we became a force. We began to find our voice, our community voice. Madam Speaker, with this brief introduction, you'll see that I have deep roots and connections into the communities of North East Victoria, and I have an absolute commitment to the future of Indi. So let me take a few minutes to talk about Indi. Indi is a Foundation Federation seat, Our first representative in 1901 was Sir Isaac Isaacs, who was educated in Yackandandah and Beechworth, my local towns. Isaac went on to become our first Australian-born Governor-General. And more recent Indi representatives include the Country Party's Mac Holton. As Minister for Repatriation, he was Indi's first minister, and Ewan Cameron, Lou Lieberman and Sophie Mirabella. I pay tribute to them for their public service, dedication and commitment. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge Mr Ewan Cameron for the role he played as my mentor. I worked for him as an electorate researcher in the old Parliament House during the years of Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser and Bob Hawke. They were heady days, and I'm delighted to reacquaint myself with friends from that time, including some of the long-serving library staff. Indi is a is a local name for the Murray River. It's a well-named electorate, as the rivers and how we use them are critical to the future of northeast Victoria. Indi is blessed with 7 major watersheds: the Goulburn, Broken, King, Ovens, Keewar, Mitterdart and Murray rivers, which contribute an estimated 50% of the water to the Murray-Darling Basin. Our major industries include manufacturing, retail, tourism and agriculture. Our food and wine is exported all over the world. Our ski fields, rail trails and festival provide entertainment to many. One of the outstanding features of Indi are our small rural communities, where people take things into their own hands. Where small communities like Yackandandah, where residents started a community business, the Yackandandah Community Development Company, we brought the petrol station, we run a produce store, and we give profits back to the community. Communities like Stanley, where volunteers set up and run their own post office. But not all is well in Indi, and I believe that Indi has not yet, as my mother would say, reached its potential. In parts of Indi, only 57% of the 20 to 24-year-olds finish Year 12, compared with 78% in Melbourne. Only 19% of those aged between 20 and 39 hold a bachelor degree or higher, compared with 31% across Australia. 63% of people in Indi are in the bottom half of the index of relative social economic disadvantage. And many of our young people move away from home to work and study. Other critical issues are infrastructure, access to transport, jobs, and I'll come to those in a minute. But, Madam Speaker, I'd like to talk to you about this part of my story where it changes. In May 2012, a group of young people decided that enough was enough, and they put out a call for action. The Indi expats, as they became known, were young people from communities right across northeast Victoria. They had moved to the cities for work, study and a better life. The federal election was looming. How could their views be heard? They had big issues. Their questions were, what sense would we make of this? What would the adults do? And as a result of these discussions, me and some of my friends came to the state of feeling big guilt. We asked ourselves, what would our legacy be? If we couldn't be for our young people, what was the point? So this question resulted in the birth of a community group named Voice for Indi. It's an incorporated body committed to building an active 21st century democracy based on engagement, respect and ideas for Indi and beyond. Voice for Indi conducted 53 kitchen table conversations with over 425 people from all parts of the electorate. We discussed what makes for a stronger relationship between people and our elected representatives. We talked about what it means to live in community, what are our issues and what makes for a strong community. And in summary, the answers were: community matters, politics matters, representation matters, infrastructure matters, services matter. And like other places in Australia, the people of Indi wanted a representative in Parliament who would put the electorate first, and they wanted their vote to count. They wanted to do things differently. Madam Speaker, the people of Indi had a vision for a community where people feel they belong and have a sense of purpose, where people pull together and help each other, where diversity, acceptance and tolerance are valued. A community that has quality services, infrastructure, education, jobs and health, and opportunities for the next generation. With this feedback, the Voice for Indi report became the foundation of a community-based grassroots election campaign that totally changed our community. What did we do? Let me tell you about our not-so-secret ingredients. Start with the involvement and enthusiasm of young people and their extensive use of social media, and add volunteer training, support and permission to act in local communities. Negotiate shared values, be respectful, be our best selves, acknowledge difference and take responsibility for our own actions. Understand that democracy is important to us. We want to participate and we want it to work for us. A good dose of courage, sense of duty, community service and trust helps. And finally, a vision for how the future could be better. And as our campaign gained momentum, we were all surprised by the groundswell of support and creativity. Jenny put her sheep in orange T-shirts and drove them around Wangaratta, Corowa and Yale sale yards. Courageous indeed. Rex organised a campaign choir bus. Year 12 students made videos. Sophie covered shops in Chiltern with balloons and streamers. We kidnapped a Wangaratta Chronicle photographer on the train between Wodonga and Benalla. Nick trained the door knockers, Leah developed policy, Cam managed media, Lauren took over communications and fed people, Dennis managed logistics, Barb organised, and lots more. And 4 of our people produced a video where they rapped. Our trains and buses failed to go. Our internet's down, the phone is out. To get heard in Indi, do you have to shout? Up there. And many of these people are here today, and I encourage you to ask them for their stories. Madam Speaker, with this strong history and support for Indi community, I am so proud to be the first independent member for Indi. So what now? The Voice for Indi report will guide me. I will listen. I will listen to the older people who have lost touch with their grandchildren, the teenagers who suffer with mental health issues, the people who know what it's like to feel hardship, adversity and get on top of it. I will turn up in pubs in Mitta, Dedorang, Whitfield, Chiltern and Alexander to hear people's concerns. I will visit community education centre such as at Kinglake, the shopping centres in Wodonga, Wangaratta and Benalla, and the schools of Marysville, Walwa, Myrtleford and Yea, as well as the wonderful festivals in Beechworth, Bright, Swanpool, Mansfield, King Valley and all the fantastic places in between. To the young people of Indi, I make a formal commitment to involve you in decision-making. I will focus especially on those of you who live in more isolated rural areas, who are disadvantaged because of poor public transport, very patchy mobile phone coverage, terrible internet connections, few employment and educational opportunities. And I will work with communities who have suffered terrible losses of families and friends through the devastating bushfires and floods and continue our rebuilding process. And to the Aboriginal people of Indi, I have a commitment to form an advisory group comprised of Aboriginal people from Indi's communities to advise me on issues such as health, education and employment. And today I also commit to make a public statement to recognise and acknowledge past mistreatment to stolen generations, their families and communities as a result of the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound sorrow on our fellow Australians. I will build partnerships to improve public transport infrastructure, access to telecommunications and health services. I will build partnerships particularly in rural mental health and to work to reduce the red tape that hinders the growth of small businesses in our rural communities. I will bring the voices and the community of Indi to Canberra. And I will work for a vision for a prosperous and caring community where businesses grow, agriculture flourishes and where everyone can reach their potential. And Madam Speaker, as the 44th Parliament begins its journey, I support the Prime Minister and Leader of the House in their desire for a more respectful Parliament. The story of my election and the role of respect has resonance for all of us. And in closing, I would like to quote from a piece of wisdom found on a toilet door at Mittagundi, an outdoor education centre for young people in the King Valley. The future is not some place we are going to. The future is not some place we are going to. We are creating. The paths to it are not found, but made. And the making of those pathways changes both the maker and the destination. The people of Indi had to shout to be heard. But to all Australians, particularly those who feel that they have not been heard here in this place, I defer to Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Before I call the Honourable Member for Fairfax, Before I call the Honourable Member for Fairfax, I would ask the galleries if they would now extend the same courtesy to the next speaker.